Welcome back to the deep dive. You know that feeling, right? That sort of persistent low hum of unease? Maybe a subtle tremor just beneath the surface of everyday life?
Hmm.
You might be listening to the news, maybe hearing anchors or politicians talk about, oh, temporary downturns or isolated conflicts.
Right. The official story.
Exactly. And yet, what your own eyes are telling you, it just feels, well, entirely different sometimes.
Yeah.
Perhaps you've noticed neighborhoods, ones that used to be vibrant, slowly hollowing out, or you read headlines promising peace that seem to totally clash with the backdrop of daily terror you might observe.
Or talk of growth while your own paycheck isn't really going anywhere.
Precisely, it's this profound disconnect, isn't it? A nagging sense that the official narratives just don't quite align with the reality unfolding right in front of us.
That exact sense of dissonance, that feeling of something being fundamentally off in the world, is precisely what struck a scholar named Daniel Mercer. He was a teacher, a really careful observer, someone who just grew tired of the surface level reports and decided, I need to look for deeper underlying patterns.
Mm.
He came to believe that the chaos wasn't random, but that the prevailing stories about the chaos were maybe simply not true. He was looking for a more accurate diagnostic.
And that search for a more precise pattern, for a framework to really understand the health, the trajectory of civilizations, I suppose. That's what brings us to today's deep dive.
It is.
We're going to explore a really extraordinary framework, one proposed by Othniel Max Daves, which he found embedded in ancient texts like Deuteronomy 28 and Leviticus 26.
Right, these very old foundational texts.
Now, before you imagine this is just, a history lesson about ancient Israel, Daves presented these not as distant theological warnings, but as something else.
As a living diagnostic tool. That's the phrase he used, like a kind of constitutional text for history itself.
Wow, okay, a living diagnostic tool. So not just for the past.
No, and what's truly fascinating here is that these aren't merely prescriptive laws for one specific people, back then. They reveal a consistent, universal blessing curse paradigm.
Universal.
That's what Days argued. A framework that applies to all peoples, tribes, tongues, and nations throughout history. It offers a profound explanation for how societies genuinely flourish,
Right.
how they eventually falter, and maybe most importantly, why their ultimate collapse is rarely, if ever, just a random event. It's more like a predictable unfolding of consequences.
Okay. So our mission today is to unpack this profound universal pattern.
Let's do it.
We're going to trace its unfolding from ancient times right up to our present day, looking at the specific blessings promised, and then the escalating series of curses that Dave says inevitably follow when a foundational covenantal center, a society's core loyalty and values, is abandoned. We'll look at powerful historical examples and then, turn our focus to modern manifestations, particularly within America and the Western world, to see how these ancient principles might be playing out in real time.
And just to be clear, before we really dive in,
Yeah.
our aim here is really to impartially analyze the ideas presented in the sources about Othniel Max Daves' framework. We're exploring this as a historical and societal diagnostic tool, looking at the patterns it claims to reveal.
Right, not endorsing one view or another.
Exactly. Not endorsing any specific theological or political viewpoint.
Right.
We want to equip you, the listener, with this lens so you can draw your own conclusions about the world around you.
Makes sense. By the end of this deep dive, hopefully you'll have a new perspective, a new way to maybe understand the rise and fall of civilizations, perhaps even recognizing patterns playing out right now, in your own community and the world at large.
That's the goal.
Okay, let's begin. To really get our heads around this framework, we need to start at the foundation, right? The bedrock. The core idea is the covenant as history's architecture. Now that sounds pretty weighty. What does it truly signify?
Well, it means these ancient texts, Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 28, they're describing something much bigger than just laws for ancient Israel. They're portraying what Daves called a covenantal architecture of history.
Okay, architecture of history. You suggested earlier it's like a universal law of gravity for societies. What makes you so confident, or rather, what makes Dave so confident this framework applies universally, even beyond its original cultural context?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it really speaks to how Daves interpreted these texts. It's less about a specific culture or religion in isolation, and more about a universal principle of cause and effect in human societies.
Ah, okay. Cause and effect.
Yeah, think of it like this. Imagine a moral or ethical law of gravity that dictates the trajectory of nations. When a society aligns itself with principles like justice, truth, And what Dave saw as right order, it tends to flourish. It thrives. Conversely, when it consciously, or maybe even unconsciously, turns towards injustice, towards what Dave calls idolatry, which we'll unpack, it's about misplaced ultimate loyalty and corruption.
Then things go downhill.
Then a kind of entropy, a disorder, begins to accelerate. It's like the system starts breaking down. And this process continues pretty predictably until either collapse or maybe conquest becomes inevitable.
Wow. So it's presented as a civilizational diagnostic.
Exactly. Offering an unflinching assessment, almost like a barometer, of a nation's moral and ethical standing, its societal health. And Daves argued this barometer works across different historical periods.
So before any promises of prosperity, the blessings or warnings of decline, the curses are even mentioned. These texts lay down some foundational principles, like the constitutional ground rules a nation has to uphold for this covenant thing to remain intact.
That's absolutely right. The texts describe what Daves called a preamble to prosperity. They emphasize three absolutely fundamental elements.
Okay, what are they?
First, the rejection of idolatry. Now, this is about absolute singular loyalty, originally to the divine, but you could maybe broaden it to an ultimate truth or moral order. It's a rejection of what the text calls counterfeit objects of trust.
Counterfeit objects of trust. So not just physical statues.
No, not at all. That's key. It's not just about idols of wood or stone. It's about anything that diverts a society's ultimate allegiance, its deepest loyalty. Think about what we collectively prioritize above all else today. That's where the idols might be found.
Interesting. Okay, what's the second one?
Second, the observance of the Sabbath principle. This means setting aside a dedicated time, traditionally a day, for rest and reflection. It's described as a sacred rhythm.
A rhythm. Why is that so important?
Because it prevents relentless exploitation, not just of people forcing them to work without end, but also exploitation of the land itself. It fosters renewal. It's a rhythm designed specifically to counter burnout and perpetual consumption, a pause built into the system.
Okay, that makes sense. Rejection of idolatry, Sabbath principle, and the third.
Third is the reverence of the sanctuary. Now, these sacred spaces, historically a temple, maybe today a church, a mosque, or Daves, might even argue the integrity of our judicial systems or institutions of learning. These are seen as the axis of reverence and spiritual grounding. They're meant to be the uncorrupted focal points of a society's highest values and aspirations, the places where truth and justice are upheld purely.
So these three things, rejecting idolatry, keeping the Sabbath rhythm, revering the sanctuary, they form what Dave calls the bedrock of covenant obedience, the essential foundational root system for a society to flourish.
Exactly. That's the foundation. And this is the crucial turn. If these core tenets are abandoned, if a society drifts from this foundation, what happens?
Yeah, what happens? How do we see maybe modern society, particularly in places like America or the Western world, showing signs of abandoning these?
Well, Days argued it's quite striking how clearly modern society seems to echo this abandonment. Take idolatry. The texts point to things like consumption, technology, and power as functional deities.
Functional deities.
How so? It's not about bowing to a golden calf, right? It's about the relentless pursuit of, say, online validation, or the almost religious belief that technology will solve all our deep human problems, or the insatiable hunger for power within our institutions, our financial markets. These become the counterfeit objects of trust.
Okay.
They replace that ultimate loyalty with fleeting gratification, or maybe just faith in human achievement above all else.
I see. And the Sabbath principle, how's that being violated?
Daves would say it's been profoundly violated. We see a relentless cycle of exploitation and exhaustion. Think about our work culture, the 24/7 connectivity, the inability to truly disconnect and find renewal.
Yeah, burnout is everywhere.
Exactly. It leads to widespread burnout and this ceaseless pursuit of more, never enough time, never enough rest. And finally, the sanctuary. Those sacred spaces, whether religious or maybe even civic, they've often been sidelined or politicized, haven't they?
Yeah, you could argue that.
They get absorbed into the logic of power, or they get transformed into what Dave's called theater of entertainment and the market of consumption. Like new temples dedicated to distraction or commerce, losing their transcendent, uncorrupted significance.
Wow. That's a powerful and frankly pretty sobering observation. So to put it plainly, this isn't just about abstract ancient laws, is it? This is about the very foundations upon which our societies stand or fall.
That's exactly how Daves framed it. He argued that the silent shift of loyalty, the unnoticed collapse of the Sabbath principle, and the gradual desecration of the sanctuary are not just, unfortunate
And
trends.
they're more serious than that.
He called them the seeds of collapse. They signal a profound erosion of the core principles that sustain a healthy, thriving civilization, subtly setting the stage for the escalating consequences, the curses that we'll explore next. It's like a quiet revolution, often unseen until its effects become really undeniable.
Okay, let's shift gears then. Let's focus on the good stuff, at least initially, the blessings. When a nation does manage to uphold its covenantal center, when it aligns with these foundational principles you've laid out, what kind of flourishing does it experience? The ancient texts lay out what Dave's described as a tapestry of flourishing, didn't they?
They absolutely do. The blessings outlined in these ancient texts, they're remarkably compact yet comprehensive. They cover the full spectrum of societal order. You've got health, robust economics, stable politics, thriving agriculture, strong families, the whole package. They paint this vivid picture of a society that is prosperous, secure, deeply respected by others, and internally cohesive, almost like an Edenic vision, Dave suggested, for how nations can truly thrive. It's not just about material gains, it's holistic well-being.
Okay, so let's break down some of these key blessings. First one, fertility and abundance. What does that actually entail, and how has it shown up historically?
Well, this blessing describes a land experiencing timely rain, bountiful harvests, fruitful trees, multiplying crops. But it goes beyond agriculture. It extends to the increase of herds and, really crucially, children, healthy families, growing population.
So life itself flourishing.
Exactly. This isn't just about material wealth today. It's about ensuring a secure future, resilience, and continuity across generations. Think about America's formative centuries, for instance. It flourished with fertile lands that provided abundant resources, right? That fostered immense agricultural and economic growth.
The land of opportunity.
Literally, a land of seemingly endless plenty, supporting a rapidly growing population. And you see this same principle in the productive agrarian societies that form the backbone of many successful ancient empires. Abundance from the ground up.
That makes a lot of sense, that holistic sense of life multiplying. Okay, next. Peace and military security. This one seems pretty straightforward, but the texts offer a specific kind of powerful image of it, don't they?
They do indeed. It's described as enemies being scattered 7 ways.
7 ways. What does that mean?
It signifies a complete rout, a total and profound defeat, suggesting divine intervention, something far beyond just having superior military tactics. This ensures deep peace within a nation's borders.
Ah, internal peace too.
Yes, allowing for robust societal development, cultural flourishing, and it actively discourages potential aggressors. For ancient Israel, this security wasn't just about their armies. The text links it directly to covenantal faithfulness.
Okay.
And for America, you could argue its geographic insulation and relatively secure borders for centuries provided an unparalleled period of peace and safety, allowing it to grow and develop without the constant existential threats that plague so many other nations. Daves might say this peace wasn't solely accidental. It was part of that broader pattern of flourishing.
Interesting. Now, this next blessing, economic sovereignty, reveals a fascinating aspect of national strength that goes beyond just, being rich. What does that look like when a nation is truly blessed in this way?
This blessing describes a nation being a lender to many nations rather than a borrower.
Okay, the lender, not the borrower. Why is that significant?
It's much more than just a financial detail. Dave saw it as a profound symbol of dominion, influence, and self-sufficiency. It reflects a stable, productive economy capable of withstanding external shocks, reducing exploitation by others, fostering innovation from within, and allowing for strategic investments globally.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Consider post-World War II America. It emerged as the preeminent creditor nation, didn't it? Through initiatives like the Marshall Plan, and the U.S. dollar became the world's reserve currency. That signified not just economic power, but a true headship, as Dave's put it, immense global influence. America was dictating terms rather than being dictated to.
Right, so it's about control over your own destiny, economically speaking, not just piling up gold.
Exactly, it's autonomy.
And what about a nation's influence on the broader world stage, morally or culturally? That brings us to moral and spiritual exemplar.
Absolutely. This blessing means that a nation's visible prosperity and its well-ordered society cause other nations to fear and respect it. Now, fear here isn't terror of its military might.
More like awe or reverence.
Precisely. A profound reverence for its character and principles. Such a nation becomes a true beacon, potentially inspiring transformations in other societies through its example of justice, truth, and ethical conduct.
Hmm.
Historically, you could argue America, during periods when it seemed more aligned with its founding ideals, cultivated a reputation for freedom and innovation. It drew people globally who sought opportunity and democratic principles. Its societal model, rooted in a commitment to certain ideals, served as a kind of testament to the blessings of living under a coherent covenantal framework.
A city on a hill, as it were.
That's the idea. And finally, there's a blessing that speaks to the deepest level of connection: divine presence. How does that manifest in a blessed nation, according to these texts?
Divine presence. That sounds quite mystical.
It is. It refers to a tangible, almost intimate sense of God's presence, described in the text as walking among you, a continuous and deeply felt reality. The sanctuary, or whatever institution serves as the society's moral and spiritual compass, becomes the focal point, radiating blessings throughout the culture.
Creating what? Security.
Creating a sense of security and intimacy that is reminiscent, Dave suggests, of the Garden of Eden. In America's history, some would argue there was, at times, a palpable sense of divine presence. You might see it reflected in periods like the Great Awakenings, which rekindled widespread spiritual fervor, or even in the solemn rhetoric of leaders who invoked profound theological reflection amidst national challenges. It was almost a foundational assumption woven into the fabric of the nation for a long time.
It's clear, listening to this, that these blessings, while obviously rooted in ancient Israel's specific context, they really seem to illustrate what Dave's called a universal covenantal principle. You can see echoes, can't you, in the high points of other civilizations. The Roman Empire with its incredible law and civic virtue, medieval Christendom with its magnificent cathedrals and universities, and early America with its abundant resources and strong civic trust.
Absolutely. It's a powerful framework for understanding how societies genuinely flourish, demonstrating that success isn't just about resources or luck, but about a deeper, maybe moral architecture.
And here's the pivot.
Here's the pivot. What Dave's found so striking is that the sources emphasize these blessings are conditional. They are sustainable only when they remain firmly rooted in that framework of order and integrity within that covenantal center.
If you lose the foundation,
you lose the blessings. And this sets up a profound inversion principle for the curses that inevitably follow.
Right, the inversion principle, because as the texts make brutally clear, these very blessings, if they're taken for granted, or maybe worse, if the objects of those blessings, the wealth, the security, the abundance, become idolized in themselves, they invert, they flip into their exact opposite, curses. And here's a stark detail you mentioned that really should grab our attention. These ancient texts dedicate significantly more verses to detailing the curses, 54 verses in Deuteronomy 28?
Compared to just 14 for the blessings, yeah.
That alone should tell us something, shouldn't it? It suggests how rapidly the forces of disorder and chaos unravel the fabric of society once that foundation is gone. It happens fast.
It's a vivid warning, isn't it? Emphasizing the speed and the comprehensive nature of societal collapse when that covenantal center is abandoned. Dave saw these curses not as random, arbitrary punishments, but as a comprehensive and escalating series of events.
Like stages.
Exactly, like a systemic entropy that systematically dismantles a nation from the inside out. They're like a detailed diagnostic report almost, chronicling the stages of a civilization's death spiral. And Dave's argued this pattern transcends time and geography.
Okay, let's brace ourselves and look at this descent into curse, these escalating waves, as Dave's called them, because they provide a really powerful global diagnostic that you argue can be applied to history, and yes, maybe to America and the world today?
Yeah, let's trace the pattern.
The first wave, described as the initial fracture, is characterized by terror, disease, and defeat. What does that look like when a society begins to unravel at this first stage?
This initial stage is a direct inversion of the blessing of peace and security. It replaces that sense of safety with pervasive terror and fear. The texts speak hauntingly of a faintness in students' eyes when they contemplate the future, and a deep sense of psychological torment just permeating the population. It also introduces wasting diseases, things that silently ravage communities, and eventually military defeats where enemies gain the upper hand. People start fleeing in panic when no one pursues them, driven more by internal dread than actual immediate danger.
That's chilling. Have we seen this historically?
Oh, absolutely. Think about periods in ancient Israel, like the time of the Judges, marked by these cycles of terror, famine, defeat, or Rome in its decline, ravaged by plagues and this growing, paralyzing fear of barbarian invasions on the frontiers.
So fear is a huge component of this first wave. How has this manifested, according to Dave's framework, particularly in America in recent decades?
Well, in America, the framework points to a pervasive cultural dread. We see it maybe in the rising rates of mass anxiety disorders, clinical depression, and tragically, the epidemics of suicide and drug overdoses.
The deaths of despair.
Exactly. This isn't just individual suffering. Dave saw it as a trembling heart across society, where people wake in fear and long for evening, just this deep psychological torment mirroring the ancient texts. For disease, think not just of acute pandemics like COVID-19, but the ongoing opioid crisis and a mental health crisis that is now reaching really unprecedented levels, straining healthcare systems with what Dave's called chronic illnesses of despair.
And military defeat.
Yeah, the pattern Dave's pointed to is painfully clear. Wars without clear victories. Since 1945, Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan. The sources note a palpable loss of deterrence on the global stage, with soldiers returning home profoundly broken, physically and mentally, by the experience.
Then looking globally, are we seeing this initial fracture playing out around the world in similar ways today?
It seems so, doesn't it? You only need to look at the ongoing conflicts, Ukraine, Gaza, Sudan, to see the terror and defeat. Then there's the resurgence of pandemics and endemic diseases like cholera and malaria thriving in densely populated, often unstable regions. Urban overcrowding, the rise of warlords, militant groups, the horror of human trafficking networks, all contribute to this global manifestation of the first wave of curse, where terror, disease, and defeat become defining characteristics of daily life for millions.
Okay, moving to the second wave. This takes us to the very land itself. Drought, famine, and futility. What's the image here? What happens when a nation is experiencing this curse?
The texts paint a really stark, almost apocalyptic picture. Heaven like iron and the earth like bronze.
Heaven like iron, earth like bronze, meaning.
It symbolizes a divine realm that seems unresponsive, shut off, and an earthly domain, the land, that becomes barren and unyielding. Human labor is spent in vain. Fields become unfruitful. The land suffers from blight, mildew, scorching winds, locusts. It's a complete inversion of that promise of abundance,
Leading to scarcity.
leading inevitably to widespread scarcity and hunger. Historically, we saw this during periods of great moral decline, like the story of Elijah's drought during times of Baal worship in Israel. Or you could look at Rome's breadbasket decline in North Africa due to overexploitation and poor stewardship, and the devastating medieval European famines that resulted from land exhaustion and climate shifts.
And in America today, how does this second wave manifest? Is it just literal lack of rain?
Dave's argued it's broader than that, though literal drought is part of it. Our agricultural landscape shows profound signs. Industrial farming practices have led to severe soil depletion, the exhaustion of vital aquifers, like the Ogallala. We're seeing increasing climate volatility, devastating droughts in the West, destructive floods in the Midwest, more intense storms. Farmers are, in a sense, spending their strength in vain, battling these increasingly unpredictable conditions.
And economically?
Economically, we see a parallel futility. Stagnating wages, shrinking savings, and rising inflation that is effectively devouring the harvests of people's labor. This leads to growing food insecurity. The sources Dave's use even note that hunger begins to rise in the richest nation on earth.
That's shocking.
And, perhaps most subtly, Dave's also highlighted a profound spiritual famine. A famine not only of bread, but of truth, echoing the prophet Amos. A deep hunger for meaning and coherence that remains unfulfilled in modern society.
This definitely sounds like a globally relevant issue, not just confined to one nation.
Oh, absolutely. We see chronic drought in vast regions of Africa, escalating water conflicts in the Middle East, widespread food insecurity across parts of Asia, massive ecological destruction and resource depletion in Latin America. Dave's highlighted that paradox of famine in the midst of plenty, due to broken supply chains, speculation, and soaring food costs worldwide. This wave really underscores a profound covenantal issue, maybe rooted in humanity's exploitation and neglect of creation, which ultimately turns back on itself.
Okay, moving on to the third wave. Predation and desolation. This one conjures up images of a world literally unraveling, doesn't it? With threats emerging from unexpected places.
It certainly does. This wave describes an environment where wild animals, both literal and metaphorical, begin to proliferate. They threaten villages, and tragically, the texts mention them devouring children and livestock. Highways become desolate, unsafe. The very fabric of societal cohesion starts to break down.
A reversal of dominion.
Exactly. A profound reversal of humanity's intended dominion and stewardship. a return to a more primal, dangerous state. Historically, ancient Israel experienced this with literal animal attacks, but also interpreted invading empires as hungry lions and wolves consuming the land. Roman frontiers were reclaimed by nature as its control weakened, and medieval plagues left deserted towns and abandoned roads, making travel incredibly perilous.
That imagery is incredibly unsettling. How do we see the societal predation manifesting in America today? I mean, we don't have lions roaming Wall Street, usually.
Right, not literal lions.
Yeah.
But Dave's argued we witness insidious forms of societal predation. Think of corporate monopolies devouring local economies, stifling small businesses and local initiative, or bureaucratic systems becoming so complex and unresponsive they stifle individual creativity and freedom.
Okay.
And perhaps most disturbingly, Dave's pointed to tech beasts, the vast digital platforms and their algorithms, being seen as preying on children through manipulative digital dependencies, designed addiction, and the shaping of behaviors.
Wow, tech beasts. That's strong language.
It is. This assault on our children, whether physically or through the digital and ideological realm, Days saw as a haunting modern parallel to the ancient warnings. He described it as an erosion of safety, fertility, and continuity as predatory forces assault the very fabric of human existence, essentially consuming the future generations.
So it's not always literal animals, but powerful, often unseen forces that consume and destroy. And globally, is this playing out with actual wild animals or more of these metaphorical predators?
It seems to be both. In parts of Africa, yes, there's the literal threat of wild animals as human encroachment and environmental degradation disrupt ecosystems. But globally, we more broadly see the rise of warlords, militant groups, the absolute horror of child abduction, forced labor, trafficking networks. These are profound systemic forms of predation.
And the desolation part.
The desolation is global too. Trade routes and war zones become impassable. Ghost villages emerge in many regions due to conflict or economic collapse, signifying this unraveling of social order and safety.
The fourth wave, then, is war, pestilence, and urban desolation. This sounds like a compounding of the earlier curses, doesn't it? Intensifying the suffering and targeting the very centers of human civilization, our cities.
It is indeed an intensification zeroing in on urban centers. This wave explicitly introduces the sword, used symbolically as an unforgiving instrument of divine retribution. It brings pervasive pestilence, especially concentrated in besieged cities, and causes basic necessities like bread to be rationed by weight, signifying extreme scarcity. It often involves powerful, swift invaders, described poetically as eagle-like, swooping in. And ultimately, it leads to widespread social collapse within those urban environments. Historically, the Assyrian and Babylonian invasions brought exactly this combination. Sword, pestilence, famine, the relentless besieging of cities like Jerusalem and Samaria, as the prophet Jeremiah's accounts vividly describe.
And more recently,
In the modern era, you could look at the world wars. Widespread aerial bombardment of cities, devastating epidemics like the Spanish flu, extreme rationing, all pushing cities to the very brink of collapse.
and in America's manifestation of this fourth wave, how do we see these elements playing out, according to Dave's?
Well, Dave's argued America has been caught in perpetual war. These seemingly endless engagements overseas that drain resources, leave soldiers deeply broken, and cast a kind of militarized shadow over the whole society. For pestilence, beyond acute pandemics like COVID-19, the ongoing opioid epidemic and the deepening mental health crisis are described in the sources almost like contagions, spreading like a contagion, silently devastating communities from within.
And scarcity and urban desolation.
Relentless inflation means that bread is metaphorically weighed out, doesn't it? Every purchase feels more costly, more precious. Food insecurity is rising, and many American cities are described as being on the brink of becoming a wasteland due to spiraling crime rates, rampant homelessness, visibly collapsing infrastructure, and in some cases, significant depopulation as people flee.
That paints a grim picture of urban decline. And around the world, are we seeing this combination of war, disease, and urban decay?
Globally, it seems undeniable. The wars in Ukraine, Gaza, Sudan continue to rage, often reducing cities to rubble. The lingering effects of global pandemics are profound, with resurgent diseases like cholera and malaria, particularly in overcrowded urban environments, posing ongoing threats. Economic collapse in various nations and the visible emergence of breadlines or reliance on food banks, even in supposedly wealthy nations, serve as a stark symbol of this widespread scarcity and urban decay.
Okay, here's where it gets particularly disturbing, I think. The fifth wave, Siege, cannibalism, and desecration. This sounds like the absolute breakdown of every human taboo, every societal norm.
It truly signifies the most profound societal collapse imaginable, according to these texts. It describes extreme famine becoming so severe that it leads to literal cannibalism, even the unthinkable consumption of one's own children, as a desperate final act of survival during a siege.
That's horrifying.
It is. It also speaks of the desecration of high places and sanctuaries, sacred sites with dead bodies being cast upon idols. This symbolizes the utter collapse of all reference, all moral order, all distinction between sacred and profane. Historically, the sieges of Samaria and Jerusalem during biblical times vividly record instances where mothers consumed their children due to starvation. The fall of Rome also involved accounts of starvation tearing families apart in the most gruesome ways, and sacred spaces were frequently destroyed and defiled by conquerors throughout history, both literally and symbolically stripping away a people's spiritual center.
So how does this manifest in modern America? The idea of cannibalism, that's incredibly extreme. Are we talking literal cannibalism?
Daves interprets this, in the modern context, in a profound and metaphorical way. He talks about a form of societal cannibalism, particularly the consumption of its youth.
Consumption of its youth.
The sources suggest that children are effectively seized by educational, technological, and ideological systems that often operate beyond parental consent or control, shaping them in ways that detach them from their natural heritage, their families, their traditions. It's described as a society forfeiting its future, where external influences exploit and essentially extract value from the younger generation for immediate gain without regard for their long-term well-being.
Wow. Okay. And the high places being desecrated.
Yeah, the nation's modern high places, maybe its towering financial institutions, its pervasive entertainment industries, its intense political cults. Daves argued these are now exposed as counterfeit sanctuaries. They demand immense sacrifices of time, money, attention, ethics, yet are often hollow at their core, rife with corruption, mirroring the ancient desecration of compromised holy sites. The idols are revealed as empty.
So the idols are exposed for what they truly are, empty and destructive. And what about desecration in a more physical or spiritual sense today?
You could see it perhaps in cities described as hollowed out by crime, addiction, and abandonment. Sanctuaries of faith, actual churches and synagogues are closing their doors at an alarming rate in many Western countries. And the fragrance of incense, that symbolic essence of reverence and worship, is now noticeably absent from much of public life, isn't it? Globally, devastated cities like Aleppo, Mariupol, or even the long decline of a once vibrant Detroit stand as poignant reminders of this potential endpoint, symbolizing societies consuming their own future through conflict, neglect, or moral decay. The fall of idols, whether they be political leaders, economic systems, or cultural trends, is a stark and painful warning sign of this stage of the curse.
Okay, the sixth wave of curse, exile and scattering. This sounds like, well, exile, but you mentioned earlier this isn't just about physical relocation, is it? It sounds like a deeper kind of loss.
It's far more profound than just physical movement, according to Dave's reading. This stage describes the land becoming desolate, cities lying in ruins, and the people being scattered among the nations, often forced to serve other gods of wood and stone, meaning alien ideologies or powers. This represents a complete geographical and cultural spiritual exile.
Can you give historical examples?
Sure, the Babylonian captivity is the classic one for Israel. The literal burning of cities, the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, forced exile to a foreign land, and the land itself being left desolate to rest. The Roman destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD also led to a widespread scattering, the diaspora, a profound and lasting exile for the Jewish people. And Dave's also cited empires like Byzantium and the Ottoman Empire as examples of powers that, after long periods of decline, essentially wasted away and scattered culturally, losing their coherence.
So in America today, how is this exile manifesting if there isn't widespread physical deportation of its citizens? How does Dave see this playing out?
Dave's observed that America seems to be experiencing a deep form of internal exile.
Internal exile, what does that mean?
It means citizens are deeply divided, profoundly fragmented from their neighbors, alienated from one another, even within the same geographical space. Communities feel hollowed out. Families are scattered by economic pressures or social breakdown. Youth often grapple with a pervasive sense of rootlessness, disconnected from place and tradition.
And this leads to?
This leads, Dave's argued, to a profound dissolution of cultural identity. We see a fragmentation of the canon, the shared national narratives, the stories we tell ourselves about who we are, splintering into mutually hostile narratives. This causes a breakdown of collective memory and purpose.
Okay.
Then there's the reordering of the calendar, where the rhythms of life are increasingly dictated by commerce and media cycles, rather than covenantal remembrance or meaningful civic or religious observances that connect us to history and shared values. There's the collapse of public commitment, meaning shared moral universes. The common ground we used to stand on feel hollowed out or politicized, losing their unifying power. And then there's this really interesting concept Dave's highlighted, a semiotics of disinheritance.
Semiotics of disinheritance. That sounds quite academic. Can you break that down for us? What does it truly mean when fundamental words like man or woman or justice lose their stable meaning in everyday conversation?
It means we literally can't even agree on the basic building blocks of our shared reality anymore. Imagine trying to build a house when everyone has a different definition of nail or hammer or level. If justice can mean wildly different, even contradictory things to different groups, how could we possibly have a common goal or make laws that everyone respects or even understands in the same way?
It makes conversation impossible.
Almost. It's like we've all been given different dictionaries, maybe different operating systems. And the language itself, instead of being a tool for understanding and building unity, becomes a source of profound confusion, friction, and division. This makes genuine public deliberation, finding common ground, incredibly difficult, maybe impossible.
And what about the institutions that are meant to uphold society and transmit knowledge, like schools?
Dave's pointed to institutional amnesia, where educational systems seem to fail to transmit a coherent understanding of history, maybe even actively severing the link to the past through ritual iconoclasm, the tearing down or aggressive reinterpreting of historical symbols and figures.
Right.
There's also an erosion of legal uniformity and sovereignty. You see fragmented legal systems, maybe norm shopping, where different groups try to live by different rules within the same society. And perhaps most chillingly, Dave's described foreign headship without a conqueror.
Foreign headship without a conqueror. What on earth does that mean?
It means national sovereignty is subtly transferred, not by an invading army marching down Main Street, but through things like debt covenants, trade dependencies, digital infrastructures controlled from elsewhere, and international treaty regimes.
Oh.
These create what he called algorithmic sovereigns. Think big tech platforms setting speech norms or reliance on global bodies, effectively becoming gods of wood and stone, to use the text's language, that dictate values and policies, often eclipsing domestic deliberation and democratic processes.
So, to put that in plain language, you're saying a nation can effectively lose its freedom and control over its own destiny, not by being invaded, but by simply signing enough paperwork or becoming too dependent on external systems, technologies, or lenders.
Precisely. Dave saw it as a surrender of autonomy without a single shot fired, a kind of quiet, insidious form of cultural and economic colonization. And globally, of course, we're witnessing the largest refugee crisis since World War II, with over 100 million people displaced, a massive literal scattering symbolizing widespread physical and cultural uprooting, driven by conflict, globalization, and what Dave's termed planetary exhaustion from unsustainable practices. This all contributes to this pervasive sense of estrangement, exile, and loss of identity.
And now we come to the final seventh wave of curse described in these texts: faintness of heart and wasting away. This sounds like the ultimate internal collapse, doesn't it? A deep spiritual and psychological despair setting in.
It is portrayed as the deepest form of internal collapse. This stage describes pervasive fear, a trembling heart, constant dread, and absolutely no assurance of the future. The text says people are longing for morning in the evening and for evening in the morning, just trapped in this endless cycle of anxiety and uncertainty. Courage is utterly eroded. It leads to an inner societal paralysis.
Have we seen this historically?
Yes. Israel in Babylonian captivity, according to the prophets, experienced this profound faintness of heart. The later Roman Empire's documented inner faintness, its decadence, its political paralysis, ultimately led to its slow, agonizing fall over centuries. And Dave's used Byzantium and the Ottoman Empire as other examples of powers that seemed to waste away for centuries, still alive but essentially powerless, their inner vitality gone long before their external structures finally crumbled.
So this isn't necessarily a sudden, dramatic end, but potentially a slow, agonizing decline, a fading away. How is this cultural faintness manifesting in America today, according to this framework?
In America, Dave's argued, we see signs of it in pervasive fear, widespread paranoia, the proliferation of conspiracy theories, and profound distrust in institutions, distrust in the media, distrust even of neighbors. Mass anxiety, depression, and despair are at record highs, as we discussed earlier. Courage seems replaced by an almost pathological fragility, where, as the text vividly puts it, the rustling of a leaf makes them flee, a profound inability to face challenges or adversity with resilience.
And the wasting away part.
The sources Dave's used highlight a sense that the land itself begins to eat up its people through crushing debt, through addiction, through despair, effectively devouring generations under the weight of accumulated national sins and a pervasive spiritual malaise.
And is this a global phenomenon too? Are other nations experiencing this kind of faintness of heart?
It certainly seems to be a widespread concern. You see significant demographic decline, falling birth rates below replacement level, becoming a major issue in many parts of the world. Europe, Japan, China, even the U.S. There's a documented erosion of civic engagement and public trust in governments and fellow citizens globally. Dave's argued that this faintness is defining leadership across the world in many places, characterized by a lack of long-term vision, courage, and moral clarity. It's like a collective spiritual and psychological malaise that ultimately leads to civilizations slowly losing their vitality, their will to live and thrive.
That is an incredibly comprehensive and frankly quite sobering diagnostic of the patterns of blessing and curse as laid out by Daves. The apparent precision of this ancient framework, mirroring so many modern realities, is truly startling.
It is. It's quite powerful when laid out like that.
Yeah.
And this is absolutely crucial to understand. Despite the undeniable severity of these curses, the ancient texts Daves was analyzing do not end in annihilation. They don't end in despair. They offer a profound invitation.
An invitation, really, even after all that unraveling and descent into despair. So judgment is not the absolute end, but rather an opportunity, a chance for course correction.
Exactly that. The sevenfold curses, as Dave's interpreted them, are not meant to utterly destroy, but to serve as a kind of pedagogy, a harsh, yes, but ultimately instructive teaching tool. They represent a critical juncture for nations, for peoples to pause, to reflect, and to consciously course correct.
So the escalating pain is meant to get our attention.
Precisely. This escalation of curse is meant to humble, Dave's argued, to break the pride and the self-sufficiency that often leads nations astray. It provides a profound, if painful, opportunity for repentance and a complete realignment with the covenant, with that foundational moral order. In a way, Dave saw it as a profound act of divine mercy, allowing for the possibility of reversal and genuine restoration.
Okay, so if a nation or a people truly wants to choose life, as the text says, and reverse this profound pattern of decline, what does that actually require? What does a covenantal realignment look like in practical, actionable terms in our modern world, according to Dave's reading?
Well, Dave suggested it's multifaceted and requires a deep, conscious shift across several domains. First, it calls for economic renewal.
Okay, what does that involve?
It means a fundamental shift away from a culture of perpetual debt and hyper-consumption towards one of diligent stewardship and productivity. Nations would need to rebuild their productive capacity, reorient their economies towards generational stewardship, thinking beyond just the next quarterly earnings report to the long-term well-being of future generations, and ideally move from being chronic borrowers back towards being capable lenders, which, as we saw, is a sign of true economic sovereignty.
Right, rebuilding from the ground up. What else?
Second, there's household renewal. This is absolutely central. It's about restoring the family as the central and covenantal hearth of society.
The hearth, the core unit.
Exactly. It means honoring marriage, ensuring the active presence and responsibility of fathers in the home, protecting children from what Dave's called ideological capture by external systems that seek to usurp parental authority, and critically, embracing fertility in children as a blessing again, rather than primarily as an economic burden or lifestyle choice. Without strong, stable households, Dave's argued, no nation can truly endure or secure its future.
That makes a lot of sense. The core units of society need to be strong and cohesive. What about the internal struggles we discussed earlier, like the widespread psychological torment, the anxiety, the despair? How is that addressed?
That leads directly to the need for mental and spiritual restoration. It requires recognizing that much of our collective psychological torment is, at root, a spiritual crisis.
A spiritual crisis.
Yes, it calls for actively seeking wisdom and truth, consciously aligning with divine principles, as understood within that covenantal framework, to combat the madness, the blindness, and the confusion that Dave saw permeating our public discourse and individual lives. This is fundamentally a battle for the mind and soul of a nation.
Okay. And what about the military aspect, the defeat element of the curses?
Third, there's a need for military reevaluation. But this isn't just about spending more money on defense. It means regaining moral authority, strategic clarity, and national coherence. It's about understanding that military might alone, however powerful, cannot secure true peace or national security without an underlying covenantal integrity. A nation's true strength, in this view, is not just its weapons, but its righteousness, its internal cohesion, and its clarity of purpose.
So it's not just about bigger bombs or more advanced technology, but about having a righteous and clear-headed foundation for using that power.
Precisely. And given the talk of identity exile and the fragmentation of shared meaning we discussed, how does a society begin to restore its sense of self, its coherence?
Yeah, that seemed like a really deep level of decay. How do you reverse that?
That's the essence of identity renewal. Dave suggested it requires recovering a truthful canon of history and tradition, a shared, honest narrative of who a people are and where they come from, acknowledging both triumphs and failures. It means establishing a meaningful calendar and binding civic rites that integrate repentance with inheritance, creating rhythms that connect generations and teach shared values.
Repentance with inheritance. Interesting phrase.
It implies acknowledging past wrongs while still valuing and carrying forward what is good from the past. It also demands consciously reducing those strategic dependencies, economic, technological, ideological, that give external powers undue influence over a nation's law, speech, energy, and industry, regaining control. And critically, it means restoring the ideal of one law that is impartially administered to reknit trust and ensure true justice for all citizens. It's about painstakingly rebuilding the very architecture of national memory, meaning, and commitment.
This sounds like a monumental task, doesn't it? A complete cultural and spiritual overhaul. But you mentioned precedents. Are there historical examples where such a national turnaround, this kind of deep renewal, has actually happened before? Did Dave's point to any?
Yes, he did, which offers profound hope, I think. Consider the British evangelical revival in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. Britain at that time was deeply entrenched in rampant exploitation, systemic injustices, and the horrifyingly dehumanizing institution of the slave trade.
Right.
Yet, a collective return to ethical and spiritual foundations, powerfully articulated by figures like William Wilberforce, John Wesley, and others, ignited a powerful social reform movement. This ultimately led not only to the abolition of slavery across the British Empire, but also to widespread changes in public morality and concern for the poor. It was a genuine national turning.
Okay, that's a powerful example. Any others?
Similarly, Dave's pointed to America's great awakenings in the 18th and 19th centuries. These were periods of widespread religious revival that transcended denominational boundaries. They profoundly influenced social reforms, including the abolitionist movement, efforts in education, the temperance movement, and helped to realign the nascent nation, at least partially, with what were then considered its foundational values and moral obligations. They show that widespread, society-altering change is possible when a people collectively chooses to re-examine its covenant, its core commitments.
So it's not just about politics or economics passing laws, but there are deeper semiotic stakes at play. You mentioned that phrase again, a battle for the very meaning of our words and ideas.
Precisely. Dave's described this current moment, in many ways, as a fundamental contest over the very meanings of core words like justice, freedom, family, even truth itself. Choosing life in this context means consciously choosing truth over illusion, choosing covenant over chaos, and opting for coherence over confusion. It's about regaining a shared moral grammar, a common understanding of what is good and true, which is absolutely essential for any society to function healthily.
And the ultimate hope, then, as these ancient texts are, for Christians at least, reframed and brought into the New Testament narrative, how does that change the picture?
Well, the New Testament, Dave's argued, powerfully reframes this entire blessing-curse paradigm. It presents Jesus Christ as the one who willingly bore the full, crushing weight of the curse on behalf of humanity, experiencing everything from the terror in Gethsemane to the profound desolation on the cross. Now, crucially, his bearing of the curse does not nullify the pattern and structural dynamics in history. Nations still rise and fall based on these principles. Rather, Dave's argued, it reorients them. The moral architecture governing history, where nations are still subject to consequences for their collective choices, remains firmly in place. However, ultimate resolution and personal hope are secured through faith in him.
So for nations, what does restoration look like now?
For nations, restoration still involves pursuing that renewed covenant life governed by reverence, truth, justice, and the divine presence. It's a pathway back towards a flourishing state, back towards blessing, but one now understood through the lens of redemption and grace, not just law and consequence.
We've taken a very deep dive today, haven't we, into an ancient, yet, as you've laid it out, remarkably prescient framework. Reflecting on all this, what stands out to you as the ultimate takeaway from this blessing-curse paradigm for our listeners?
Yeah, if we try to connect all these threads, I think it's that Deuteronomy 28 and Leviticus 26, as interpreted by Daves, are not just simple moral allegories or ancient history. He presented them as revealing a systemic law of blessing and curse, what he even called the moral gravity of history itself.
Moral gravity.
Yeah, this pattern dictates with often startling precision how civilizations rise, how they begin to unravel, and how they can ultimately descend into chaos and humiliation when they rebel against, or simply neglect, a foundational covenantal order. From ancient Israel to Rome, from the British Empire to modern America and the current global order, Daves argued the logic is unshakable and consistent. When covenantal truth is kept, blessing tends to multiply. When it is abandoned, curse compounds systematically. And this plays out, he believed, across all peoples, tribes, tongues, and nations.
And right now, it feels like America, and indeed much of the world, finds itself squarely at a crossroads, doesn't it? Confronted with this very pattern unfolding in real time. We've traced the potential inversions. Provision turning to food insecurity, peace to terror, fertility to demographic decline, national confidence to a pervasive faintness of heart. It feels like it's all playing out before our very eyes, often just as these ancient texts describe.
It does feel that way sometimes. But the profound conclusion, the final word of these ancient texts, is not annihilation. It is hope. As the scripture itself states quite clearly, "See, I have set before you today life and good, death and evil. Therefore choose life." That invitation for return, for humility, for repentance, for choosing a different path, Dave stressed that it is always profoundly still there. The door isn't finally shut.
Daniel Mercer, the watcher of patterns you mentioned at the beginning, the one who started us on this journey, he bore the heavy burden of this knowledge, didn't he? He knew, according to your sources, that the curse was real, that its consequences were devastating, but he also held firm to the truth that mercy was ultimate. He understood that even faintness and wasting were not the end, but an invitation. A painful one, maybe, but still an invitation to turn back.
Critical choice point.
So that really raises an important question for you, our listener, to maybe mull over long after this deep dive ends. What will you do with this framework, this deep dive into the architecture of history? How will you discern these patterns if you see them in your own life, in your community, in the world around you? Because in the end, Daves' framework suggests the fate of nations, large and small, hangs not on mere chance, but on a series of fundamental collective choices. The choice between life and death, blessing and curse.